Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Coffee and Issues with Carroll Bernard and Michael Lejeune. Hey, Mike, how you doing today?
Doing good, man.
Well, it's good to have you once again. What are we going to talk about today?
Well, what are we not going to talk about today? How about that? That's probably a better.
We're solving issues, hopefully, here is what the intention of this whole show and this podcast is. So one of the things that is going to hit contractors early on inside of the process of getting set up and even maybe way beyond down there is just the issue of deceptive, misleading, inaccurate, irrelevant, and conflicting information. And there's a lot of it out there. I think that's a source of frustration for a lot of small businesses. And today I wanted to talk about some of those examples and really, how do you deal with it? I'm sure you've seen this as well.
Yeah, I've seen it a lot. And I think just for the sake of kind of setting the stage, I think it's important for people to understand the difference between misleading information as well as stuff that's relevant to me and that sort of thing, because I do see that as one of the biggest challenges in our culture at the moment is anytime somebody disagrees with anybody, they tend to label it as misleading. And it's like, no, we just have a difference of opinion about how you go about this or that. So one of the things to know is just because something isn't for you or it's not a good fit, it doesn't mean it's misleading. A lot of times it's either not for you in your industry or like the path that you're on, whatever it is, but it could be relevant for somebody else. So that's one of the first things to understand is there's a lot of great information out there and not all of it is for you. When you start to drill down into the business you run, the direction you're trying to go, are you trying to build what I call a lifestyle business where you can kind of travel around, do what you want, but you don't necessarily want to build this monster company and sell it for millions of dollars someday. If you're trying to build that type of lifestyle business, the direction you're going to go is different than, say, somebody else who is trying to build and then sell their company. There's different steps you're going to take throughout that journey of your business. And so you need different information. And that's one of the first things up front that I think people should know.
Yeah. And I want to also say that I am obsessed with accurate information, and I'm always really looking at what we're putting out on our training platform, as well as right here. And one of the things I wanted to say about this show, and also some of the direction that we've kind of gone into the Gavology platform, is that we don't only talk about government from federal alone. We really want to talk about it from the big picture, federal, state, local, ports, counties, school districts. And you got to also take some things with both relevancy and applicability, because those two can be different markets for some people. And so what might be relevant inside of the state and local market might not be relevant necessarily inside of the federal, and vice versa. And so that's why I wanted to really talk about this topic today, because that is an issue that you need to understand. But also there's just the bad stuff out there too. And I wanted to talk about that for a second. So let's start out with the bad, which is deceptive information. Mike, do you have an example of how you have seen deceptive information being put out there?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest challenges with the deceptive information is, let's say you're brand new to the market and you go and sign up in the SAM database. The moment you sign up in SAM, you're going to start getting these emails. And I think a lot of the emails you get are deceptive. Like you'll get the email that says, quick, you need to come in and have somebody finish your SAM profile because it's not complete yet. And if it's not complete, you're not going to get awarded a contract. So you need to pay us $1,000 or $5,000 to complete this. That's completely false. Like you can go in there and do it yourself. The fact that you're getting the email is because you registered in the SAM database. You got through the process. So clearly you know how to get in there and do that. The challenge is all that information is accessible to people so they can go down and download that every day and then mark it to you. And so that's one of the messages I hear all the time. And then you'll get other messages just based on being registered in the SAM database. You'll get messages about how you're missing out on contracts and all these kind of things. And you need to buy this service or that service because you're missing out. And what you have to know is those are just generic marketing messages. And that's what people are putting out there, hoping to hook people. I was talking to a guy yesterday, and he was telling me, we paid this company to do our certification, and then they maintain our SAM profile and they maintain this, and they maintain that. I'm like, I've been in this business 20 years and I don't even know the two things you just listed that you say they maintain. And so I just asked, I was like, how much does that cost you a year? He's like, it's $5,000. It's an annual subscription for them to maintain our sites that, like, once you put in the data, that's it. There's nothing else there. And so, but some people get the marketing message and it looks so urgent. And you'll also see stuff from people that it looks very official from the government. So like you'll go on it and the logos will be there and it looks like, man, I wonder if this is from the SBA, or I wonder if this is from a department in the government I've never seen before because it looks official. And then you look at it and it's a .com and you're like, oh, this isn't official at all. And you start going down the rabbit hole and you're like, I don't think they're telling me the truth. And so I see a lot of what I consider flat out, I just look at it as lies, is on the marketing side, trying to get you to buy services. And I see that a lot of times from people. And it's not that I don't think some of those services are valuable, because if you don't have the time to fill out a profile, if you don't have the time to figure out your Dun & Bradstreet and this and that, you may not have the time, or that may be something that's out of your wheelhouse that just really frustrates you. It's actually worth the money to pay somebody to go and do it. But don't pay tens of thousands of dollars, which is what I've seen, for something that should be either free or very low cost. And there's a lot of sources out there, whether it's free YouTube videos or a quick call with one of us, and we'll say, no, you just need to go here and do this, and you'll knock that out pretty quick. So those are a couple off the top of my head.
Yeah, I mean, I think you stole a little bit of my thunder there with the fake websites and stuff. That's one of the things I had on my list too. And, you know, we didn't coordinate lists, but yeah, one of the things that I can't stand, and it happens anytime there's a huge hurricane disaster, there's these fake FEMA sites that pop up. And I even saw one that was just like, I thought it was the real FEMA site. They had the FEMA logo. It looked so official, but because I knew and I looked up at the URL and I saw that it was a .com, I'm like, okay, I know FEMA is not a .com. But again, it's just like, hey, pay us to get registered in the FEMA database. And that's not, both that's deceptive and that is inaccurate, because they're not going to get you in the FEMA database unless they're probably registering you for SAM and ticking the box that says, yes, I want to be in disaster registry database, because that's where you put it. And you can do that yourself when you go through your SAM registration.
Right. But, you know, I think you bring up a good point, though. There are things that happen like a hurricane, or even like with what was going on in Afghanistan. And you see these natural disasters, man-made disasters, these crises and emergencies. And guess what scammers do? They try to take advantage of that stuff. And so if you're in that SAM database and I know I can get access to it, and I can put a message out there that says, hey, come enter in your information and get FEMA contracts, or get contracts for something going on in Afghanistan, or fill in the crisis, right? You know, like when the Haiti stuff was going on, I've seen people say, hey, if you pay us $3,500, we will help you get this contract because they need a woman-owned small business or whatever it is. And they pay the money and it goes nowhere because all it was a scammer trying to get some money. So you've got to really be on the lookout. Anytime there's something big in the news and you're in a database like SAM, some of those people are going to ping you with stuff and just try to get some money or some information or whatever it will be so they can go on to the next victim and do something else. So that's one of the big things that I see, again, because a lot of people don't know the market. So they're like, oh, well, I can just pay $3,500 and I can win a $500,000 contract. Sure, I'll do that.
Yeah.
I'd trade that money all day long.
Yeah. And that moves us to misleading information. And I've got a good example that is a little bit of a segue from deceptive to misleading, but sometimes there could be well-intended misleading information, and sometimes it gets put out or taken into the wrong context. But then there's just straight up misleading information. And I had to print this out. This is something that I saw years ago, and I'm going to read it. Subject line: multi-million-dollar contracts for women. The U.S. government plans to spend billions in Oregon, Idaho, and Utah, and Nevada this year. I was in the Pacific Northwest. I got this email. I guess because I'm Carroll, they thought I was a woman. So
that's right.
I got the email. Millions of that is reserved for women-owned businesses. If you are a woman, this is your year. diamonds are literally falling out of the sky. I love that. It's like, man, if diamonds are literally falling out of the sky, I'm going to buy an umbrella and a bucket.
That's right. Turn the umbrella upside down.
And I think that this is misleading because it's got some truth to it, because there are a lot of opportunities. There are opportunities for women-owned businesses. But at the time I read this, it was a year that women-owned business set-aside spend was at an all-time low. And I know that of all of the certifications that there are, women-owned business is usually the least one that is utilized by federal agencies. And I know that there's been a big push to do more there. And that's part of why the SBA's kind of launched this certification program. So there could be this better pathway. And I think to help contracting officers be able to see that, okay, these firms are vetted, because there's also a lot of fraud in the government anytime there's a self-certification. So anyway, the point that I wanted to make here is just that the reason why this could be misleading is because somebody not looking at this can think like, hey, this is awesome. I need to get involved with this. I need to go after this. And we talked about this in one of our earlier episodes. Don't sacrifice what is working for you in your current business to chase down the diamonds in the sky.
Yeah, the bright, shiny objects.
Yeah. So have you seen any other misleading information?
Along that same vein, you will see a lot of times where somebody will say, oh, well, you're a woman, or oh, you're a minority, or oh, you're a service disabled veteran, oh, you're a hubs, you're like fill in the blank. Oh, this is going to be a slam dunk for you. All you have to do is go get your certification. The government's just going to hand you money.
Yeah.
Like they're going to hand you money so fast, you're not going to know what to do with it. And it's just not true. And yes, they would like to hand you money. They like to support their goals. But we talked about this last week. That's not the priority. And you also have to think about the fact that you're not the only woman, SDVOSB. There may be 5,000 women-owned small businesses that do what you do. And they're not all going to see the opportunities that you're chasing or talking to those people. But there's still, I've seen opportunities that if you click on the interested vendor tab in SAM, I've seen as many as 54 companies have checked that box. Like, hey, I'm interested in this. And that doesn't even count the people that didn't click on that. Right. So there may be 50 to 100 people that are also WSB and SDVOSB and 8A and, fill in the blank, also competing on that. So just because you get one of those certifications doesn't mean money's just going to rain down like the diamonds that you're talking about. The other one that always gets me is the GSA schedule. So people will come to me and say, I heard I have to get a GSA schedule. The government buys on GSA. I've got to get a GSA schedule. Right. And for me, I always say, well, let's look at the numbers. And I tell all of our clients, I only recommend a GSA schedule about 15 to 20% of the time, because it's based on not only who buys what you sell, it's based on your target market. So what if your focus is on an organization that doesn't use GSA, even if everybody else is using it to buy your service? Maybe they're using a different contract vehicle or something else just for that organization. So that's where you have to do your research on that to figure out, is this viable for me? Not just because somebody said it, or I was going through a checklist and the next thing on the checklist was go get your GSA schedule. Right. And it takes so long to get it. It could take a year and a half to get your GSA schedule, depending on which one you need. There's I don't remember what it's called, not a fast track or something like that for some tech companies, and they can get theirs much faster on that one. But even then, is that what you need to sell to the government? Yeah. And then even then, it's once you get the GSA schedule, how do people know about it? Like, it's not like you have millions of people, or billions, whatever it is, on Amazon constantly searching for products. That's not what's happening. There are some people searching on GSA, but then there are a lot of people that are going about their daily business, putting out RFPs, things like that, and they'd like to use GSA, but they're not necessarily searching for you. And so the GSA is not a slam dunk, but it is a really good tool in your toolkit if that's how people buy your services.
Speaking of GSA, I had that under the irrelevant category, irrelevant to the journey. I'll circle back on that one in a second, but it could also fall under the misleading category. Before we kind of go off the subject of misleading, when you were talking about if somebody told you to go out and get the certification or set up a separate entity, something like that, there could be also well-intended misleading information. And when you started saying that, it reminded me of a client that I had, a minority-owned business, 8A certified, a husband and wife team, and the wife heard from, it was either from a prime contractor or somebody that was working in a state or local agency. They said, hey, you should set up a separate woman-owned business. And my question was like, why? You have like a minority-owned business certification. The MBE and the 8A certification is much more utilized than is the women-owned business. You're going to have this separate administrative thing that you're going to have to launch this new business, set it up in SAM, the whole 9 yards, business administration, taxes. Is that really worth it? I advised against it, but I think maybe she did it anyway. And then I don't think it worked out. I haven't seen a lot of those kind of things work out for people that just are. And we talked about that in one of our earlier episodes. Why are you in it? Why did you create this business? Well, because I'm a woman-owned business and somebody told me that I could get all of these opportunities that's going to flow in. So we see that too.
And I see the whole, hey, you need a separate LLC for this and a separate and it's like, you don't even have one LLC working right. So let's get the one working right before we go down that other path that may be valid for you. But if you are just coming in and you're, one of my friends, Russ Barnes, calls pre-revenue, which you don't even have revenue coming in the business, or it's very little, like you really need to get that up and running. Because the other thing with spinning off the separate LLC is, let's say you do have 5 or 6 contracts, you just started this new company. Now the new company has a brand new start date, no past performance, and you're trying to build all that while you're running the other company. It's a lot of work. The other one that you'll hear a lot that is not only misleading, it's false, but I think it is well-intentioned, is people will talk to a husband and wife and say, oh, why don't you have your wife take full ownership of the business? And the thing is, well, she's not making the decisions. Whatever it is, right? Or the SDVOSB. Well, I'm the SDVOSB, so they wanted me to have my name on that line as owning 51%. I'm like, but are you checking the boxes? Because if you're not checking the boxes as not only the person who owns 51%, but you're making all the major decisions, you're working in the business, all those sort of things, you're not eligible for that. And that's where you were talking earlier about a lot of people self-certify as, well, my wife owns the business, but she doesn't work in it. Well, technically she owns the business, but that doesn't necessarily qualify you guys for that. So I think there's some well-intentioned info there. And when somebody says that, they may say, well, your wife is eligible for it, so go and make yourself eligible, but they don't necessarily explain that in detail what that means. So now you're thinking, oh, she just has to be in name, and that's not the case.
And it's not as easy as just switching ownership, because there's ownership and control is where most people don't understand and they fall short. We have some great education in Gavology to kind of explain that.
Sometimes there's just more to the story. And as you dig a little bit deeper, you're like, oh, yeah, we can't do this because of this, or we shouldn't do this because of that. And so that's where it just helps you to get the full picture.
Absolutely. Let's move on to inaccurate information. Now, I don't want to throw anybody under the bus. I mean, again, well-intentioned information, sometimes just inaccurate. I mean, I saw it once on a government website. Again, going through the process, there's a few things here. We talked about the relevance of the journey. I'll get to the relevancy next. But if you're looking at something where it's like, hey, get your business registered with SAM at this particular place, where it says, like, I'm not going to say the name of the company, but I've seen it a lot. And I've even seen it on a government website where they unintentionally directed somebody to a third-party website that takes money to register at SAM instead of the official .gov website, a SAM.gov website. These companies are so deceptive sometimes it can even be tricky for people in the government, because it's like, if you Google SAM, the first like 3 or 4 or 5 results are not going to be SAM.gov. It's going to be advertisers. And with some of the search engines, you can't even sometimes tell that it's an ad, and it looks like maybe, hey, there's the official registration point, and that's how a lot of people kind of end up in that situation. Another inaccurate one is, you were talking about some of the things that people sell. It's just like, you know, hey, if you purchase this, we got this directory, we're going to put your name in, and all of the contracting officers look at this directory. That's not right.
That's a good
I was a
one.
contracting officer. There's only one place that I went, which was either sam.gov or the dsbs.sba.gov, which was the SBA's official small business website where they have the small business profiles.
My favorite ones are also like the CIO or program manager or whatever it is, fill in the blank magazine or directory that they print, and they try to get your ad in it and have you listed in the directory. Clearly the only way they're making money is by people putting their ads and stuff in those directories and having them shipped off. And I've never been in an office and walked in and seen a CIO or program manager or contracting officer flipping through the direct. I've never even seen it in their office before, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, that's a big misleading one.
And then there's just straight up scams. I had another guy call me, say, "Hey, you got this email. It looks so official. It had like an actual contracting officer's name on it. And they were like, hey, we need you to ship these items. Give us a quote and then ship these items over to this warehouse in Georgia. And then we're going to get you paid on the back end." And I'm like, I wouldn't do that. So again, the .com kind of gave it away in the email address, but this guy was about to send some product that he would have never gotten paid for.
Yeah. And that's the kind of stuff that ramps up a lot with natural disasters and other things. Even when you look at COVID, just the money that's being given out, it's like, hey, if you apply here, there's a government grant. We're going to give you $500,000 for your business. And there's a $2,500 application fee or, something along those lines. Like scammers tend to use all those kind of things to just take a little bit of money from people. So,
yep. So let's talk about irrelevant information. And we had started talking about this a little bit earlier. Kind of, you mentioned it. I actually had this on my list too, where if you're Googling how to do business with the government, you never know what you're going to get out there in terms of like the path. But I've seen it a lot where it's like, get registered, get a DUNS, get registered, get a GSA schedule. Again, relevancy. Don't just take that. And some of these sites are pretty credible sites. And you may even see something on the government website that says to get your DUNS, get registered, look into getting a GSA schedule. Now, taking into context, if they say look into or research, they didn't maybe say get on the GSA schedule. And that particular pathway may not be your journey. And
right.
You were alluding to that earlier, Mike.
Yeah, I think that's a big challenge. But even in the early stages of forming your business, I'll go back to the SDVOSB and the WSB. I had a client that came to me and he said, hey, I was told, a rumor basically, I was told that my SDVOSB is going to help unlock a lot of doors for us and it's going to be super simple for us to do business. And so I just started questioning him. And I said, hey, who's the target market? Who are you focused on, the service, this, that, and the other? And I said, well, let's pull some data. So we started pulling some data. And I said, well, based on what you sell and who you're trying to target, the government only buys about 4% of their spend through SDVOSBs, but they buy almost 35% as WSBs. And he was like, man, I wish I'd have known that before, because my wife and I are working 50-50 in the business. Yeah. And I could have just given her 51. I could have taken 49. And we could have easily put her in charge of and met all the requirements for WSB. Yeah. But I thought my SDVOSB was more valuable.
Yeah.
And given what you shared with me, that is not the case based on the data. So sometimes it's decisions like that we try to make based on a friend said something instead of the data. And so if you go look at the data, you can very quickly, we weren't on the phone 15 minutes. Yeah. And I said, based on everything you told me, that's not the case at all. And so if you can meet the requirement, you should probably flip this.
Yeah. Well, hey, and we talked about earlier the importance of the clarity and the market research and just getting in there and seeing what's relevant, because there may be some numbers going back to that whole, like, the government is spending millions of dollars with women-owned businesses. I mean, that's accurate in some regards, but in what NAICS codes is it relevant all throughout? Like in your geographic location, in your NAICS code, what does the spend look like for you?
For this client, the reason why the spend was the way it was because he was targeting a specific agency. And he was like, this is the agency where we've done work before with other companies. we not only understand the agency, this is going to be a sweet spot. Nobody else is going to be competing with us. And like, yeah, absolutely, this makes sense for you. But you got these two things flip-flopped because you didn't look at the data. And so, but there's also this other agency that'll be helpful to you as well. And it also is focused on WSB money. And so like those little bitty things like that can make a huge difference in the formation of your company and how it's structured and all those kind of things. The other thing that I see a lot is, I don't know how this became a thing, but every time I turn around, somebody is coming to me and say, I was told I needed a joint venture. I need to form a joint venture. And I'll say, well, why do you think you need a joint venture? Like, because we're going to work with them. They're going to be our teaming partner on this. And like, all you need is a teaming agreement. You know, once you get into the whole joint venture, it's a whole different ball of wax. And a lot of times you don't need something near that complicated. You just need a teaming agreement. So let's put together a teaming agreement, spell out all the details, and move forward. Because once you get that joint venture, and then you got a legal entity, it pays taxes, it's doing all these types of things. And then that's separate from if that joint venture is with a large and you're trying to do the mentor protege program. Those are all separate. This guy was just, hey, I'm trying to win this one contract. I want this other company to work with me. And I was told I need a joint venture.
Right. Right. And I think that that's part of where some of the education comes in. And we not here just to plug Govology all day, but we do have some great training on teaming and joint venturing and the mentor protege program.
Yeah.
And you got to wrap your head around that stuff, because I remember when I left contracting, went over to the SBA, and I was the guy at the Portland district office at the time responsible for reviewing things like people's mentor protege applications. And then they were getting into these joint ventures. And it took me like 3 or 4 classes before things like started to click into my head. And I'm like, okay, I see how it makes sense now. But I've seen that too, where somebody will just come in and they're talking with somebody and then they're telling me that they want to set up a joint venture. And then first of all, that might not be the right strategy for everybody, but it could be. Again, relevancy in there. I shared something in the last episode, and as I was taking a shower later that night, I was just like, man, I wish I would have talked more about the relevancy of that statement that I just made. That shows how much of a geek I am inside of this game. But what I said last episode is that there's this marketing paradigm of know me, like me, and trust me. And you really need to have this to get opportunity. And that is accurate in some cases, but not all. And I was wanting to clarify and bring some relevancy to that statement today, because there's not every situation that the government needs to know you, like you, and trust you. If they're buying a box of cups, and you sell it on a website, maybe they're even buying it from Amazon. And it's like, hey, I need a box of cups for my little Chief's mess on the USS Scout. I'm just going to go and buy that. I don't necessarily need to know, like, and trust the vendor. It's a low risk item. Another example is a contractor. Maybe they're in construction and they're bidding with a state or local agency that primarily does low bid contracting. All you really need to do is be not debarred or not excluded from the competition. And as long as you give them a compliant bid that is responsive, is what they call it, and you're a responsible contractor, those are 2 terms that they use, responsive and responsible. Part of the responsible check is that, hey, you're not debarred, and you give them the lowest price, you're going to get the job. So I just, again, that's relevancy. And I don't want somebody to just take that and say, well, hey, now it's like, I got to go and do all this stuff. But the more subjective that the procurement gets and the higher dollar value with subjectivity and evaluation factors that are looking at things like past performance, past experience, the team, those are when you really start to want to use that know me, like me, trust me paradigm, so that you're not just some unknown entity on paper, essentially.
No, you're absolutely right. And not everybody that knows us knows that RSM actually has a product division. So we have a product division called Veteran Warehouse Supply. And one of our first contracts a couple years ago when we launched that was power strips. The VA needed power strips. And like, they don't need to know and like and trust you. Then one of the next contracts was a few $1,000s in wash rags. Then one of the next contracts was like the scrubs. They needed names on all the scrubs and stuff. Like, they don't necessarily need to know, like, and trust you that much for those kind of things, especially the power strips and wash rags. Like, it's one of those things where, hey, let's get a price on it. It's the right price. It's a trusted vendor. Okay, let's go. I don't need to have a conversation with you about it. Let's go ahead and grab this thing.
Yeah. And actually, that's kind of what spurred on this whole episode, was just having people also understand the relevancy on some input that they're receiving to their business and be able to process that and determine for themselves as if it's applicable or not. The last thing I wanted to talk about today, Mike, and then we're going to go into a little bit of a recap, is conflicting information. Now, when I was a young buck and I started working for the SBA back in 2010, I just came out of contracting. My mentor was basically guiding me, and what we were doing at the time was telling people when they fill out their capabilities narrative is to make sure you're putting your certification up there in the front of it. Like, so SDVOSB firm specializing in this, and then you put your value statement. Over the years, you start listening to like other things that, and like we were talking about on a couple of episodes ago, don't lead in with your certification. So you could be getting some well-meaning conflicting information from two different sources, which is right. And in some regards, I think sometimes there's no really necessarily hardcore right or wrong. There might just be a different way of doing it, and it could be better or maybe not. But sometimes if you get that conflicting information, take it with a grain of salt. Again, process it, what makes sense to you, and then apply it. And if you have a trusted advisor like a coach, a PTAC counselor, if you're working with any one of the other G-Fund mastermind folks that I talked about in one of our earlier episodes, bounce some things off of them as well to see what makes sense for you.
Yeah. No, that's great advice. And I think the biggest takeaway on that piece there is you do have to choose what's right for you, because at some level, you may not like somebody's advice over somebody else's, or you could also create a hybrid solution based on your advice and my advice. Maybe there's somewhere in the middle and you prefer that than either one of us going 100% down that road. The one thing that I would say is marketing and a lot of things have evolved over time, and we've gotten smarter about how we do things. And so when you look at something and somebody says, well, hey, you should absolutely list your certifications first, I'm going to tell you that's wrong. And I can give you a whole bunch of reasons why I can tell you that's wrong. It's probably not going to lose you the contract,
right? But
I prefer to do it my way, because my way, I feel, is going to get you noticed more if you use a data point up front and communicate your value. You always hear me and Josh say, hey, your value is not your status, right? That's not your value. Now, the other part of that factor is it depends on who's reading your capability statement. So you could show that capability statement to 100 contracting officers, and you could show them my version, and 90 of them could love my version, 10 of them could hate it because they only cared that they saw the service disabled, whatever status is up front.
And so they might say, why don't you put this up at the front?
I mean, why don't you switch that?
Sometimes it's a little matter of opinion. And your capability statement in one person's hands may get a completely different review and feedback in the next person's hands.
Yeah. And here's my input on that. If you have shown your capability statement to 100 people and only one of them have complained about something, don't change to meet that one person's complaint. Don't let one person throw you off from what you feel is the right thing, because if you have clearly communicated your value and it's working, but one person says, well, I don't know why you don't have your SDVOSB up front, because we have it in the bottom right-hand corner. I don't know. Whatever the reason is, but I do see people shift their strategy, shift their documentation over one complaint. And I'm not even going to lose a wink of sleep over one complaint. So that's where you've got to stick to your guns and say, look, I feel this is right. I'm not going to get distracted by all of this noise over here. And I'm going to keep moving forward. Now, if everybody says, hey, what's wrong with your capability statement, then that's an indication you should probably make some changes.
And then whatever makes sense to you, right? If you want to put SDVOSB as a lead into your narrative. And that was just an example, but on that specific topic, I think the message here is don't just let it be that. Also, make sure you connect the value behind it. And sometimes it's a matter of your own personal preference. If you want to do it, I don't think the contracting office is going to be like, well, I don't like that you put your statement up front, so no contract for you.
Yeah, they're not going to do that.
let's go ahead and recap a few things that we talked about here today. Mike, deceptive information. Again, we talked about that. It's out there. There's deceptive and there's flat out scams. Remember to check the domain. Is it a .gov or a .com?
The only thing I'll add on to that is trust your gut,
right,
and check with somebody else.
Right.
Check with somebody. Run it by one of us. We'll say yes or no, thumbs up, thumbs down,
right,
and it won't cost you a dime.
Right. And what I will say that is like not all .coms are bad companies. There's great companies that are actually doing good services for businesses. Absolutely. But also you do have government that is using .gov and .net extensions in some situations. And two examples I can share with you are fedconnect.net. A lot of government spend goes through fedconnect.net, and then fedbid.com, formerly known as fedbid.com, which is now Unison Marketplace. That's the big reverse auctions website. So if you see something, again, that you're not sure of, don't use that. And that's the thing I will also say. If we make something as a statement, don't maybe say, that's always the case. That's never the case. Be careful of always and never statements.
Yeah.
So misleading information, just again, be careful with the easy money claims. Check with your trusted advisor if you have a trusted advisor. And again, that may be someone from your G Fund Mastermind. If you guys don't know what G Fund Mastermind is, you're going to have to go back to one of our previous episodes where I defined that. But essentially, it's the PTACs out there, the MBDAs, the SBDCs, that the Department of Transportation, small business, the government-funded resource partners that are also out there counseling. Or if you have a coach that you're working with, check with your coach. Inaccurate information. If somebody tells you the opposing information to what you heard, again, do some of your own research and again, check with your trusted advisor. Mike, the last one is the irrelevant information. Again, do the homework so that you can chart your own course and create your own roadmap with relevancy. Don't follow somebody else's, especially if they're not in the same industry, because even though some journeys are similar, many are different. And don't allow a telemarketer to call you up and convince you that a GSA schedule is the right move for you unless they're willing to walk you through the research and confirm that it is, right? And that's the difference between a good company and one that's kind of a little bit questionable, is the one that'll say like, hey, I believe GSA is right for you, but let's research that first to see if it is. And if it's not, they're not going to put you through the ringer there.
That's right.
There's companies that are only out for the sale. And if they're not going to do the research with you to confirm it, then that's the ones that you got to look out for. Do you have anything else to share on some of that recap?
I think you did a great job recapping it. I'll just throw back out there, trust your gut, ask some of your colleagues. And then at the end of the day, you got to make a decision. You got to make a decision on whether it's a service or whatever it is, if that's right for you. If there's a direction you take or a piece of advice you take, you've got to make a decision at the end of the day if that's the one for you. The other thing here is, and something we haven't really talked about, and I'll close with this. Let's assume you make a mistake. You can fix it. It's just one mistake. Let's say you make 5 mistakes. You can probably fix it. You may have lost a little bit of money, but there's nothing you're going to do that's most likely going to just totally destroy your business or your reputation or anything like that. We take some of those things really, really personally. And I can tell you, I've made all kinds of mistakes in business, and you can repair and fix all this kind of stuff. So don't beat yourself up if you did fall for a scam or something along those lines. There's a lot of people have done it, a lot of people before you. So don't take it too personally.
Yeah. And at the end of the day, be a seeker of truth and fact. Reflect on each piece of information that you get and consider what makes sense to you again.
Yep.
Right?
Is
it relevant to your unique journey in the government marketplace? And I think that we said it all, Mike.
Yep. It's a good recap.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for joining us again today, and we'll see you on the next episode. Take care.